What's going on, Steelers Nation? It's Ravens week. AFC North lead on the line. Big playoff implications in this one, as you would expect. Starting to think a little bit about a home playoff game. Dreaming, wishing, but excited to talk about this heavyweight matchup, scheme, matchups, stats, all that stuff. There's a lot to dive into with this. Just before we get started, please make sure that you like, subscribe to the channel. Drop me a comment with your predictions. As always, I love reading those before the game starts. We didn't have anyone actually correctly guess the score last week, even though a lot of you guys obviously picked the Steelers. So I'm going to make the giveaway just a little bit easier this week. If the Steelers win, I'm just going to pick a random person in the comments. You'll get a free t-shirt from our channel sponsor, Homage. Just with the holidays coming up, please make sure, if you're shopping for some Steelers gear for your loved ones or whatever, just be sure to use the link in the description of this video. And also, just like real quick, for those interested, did break down some of my observations from the Steelers' offensive performance against the Commanders. Talked a lot about like Russell Wilson, some scheme stuff, Broderick Jones playing probably his best game of the season, and just some different things, good, bad, everything in between. So if you're, wanting some additional film room content, please make sure that you consider just becoming a channel member. It's less than $4 a month. You get the badges, the emotes, early access to videos like this, and then additional film room content kind of on top of that. We may do an NFL draft prospect film room early in the week if I can get around to it. That's kind of my goal right now. But those will heat up obviously sooner than later, just with the draft kind of on the horizon here. But a lot to talk about. So again, I appreciate your all support. Let's dive into this one. Injuries up first for the Steelers. I think the big question mark here is, whether or not Jaylen Warren's going to play. He's listed as questionable. He was a DNP on Thursday and then a very, very limited participant on Friday. With the Steelers, they haven't, as of this moment, they didn't call up like an additional running back from the practice squad. I'm not sure if Warren's going to be able to go. Like a back injury is like one of those weird things too. It's really difficult to predict. The big thing with Warren, he had some good runs last week. He has had a really unfortunate season, just like really struggling to stay healthy. The big thing with him is like pass protection. So like he's obviously their primary pass protector. I think he's done really his best work this season has honestly been just like on checkdowns, on third and downs, like getting into the flat, making guys miss, picking up some like hidden yardage. If you were to choose like a week to like maybe miss him, like this week isn't necessarily a bad one for reasons that I'll talk about later. But the Ravens, they do some like sim pressure stuff, but they're not like an overly like blitz heavy team. So this isn't like the worst time to, sit him if he's not fully healthy or whatever. And I think Cordell Patterson, like he had a huge blitz pickup on the first Russ touchdown to George Pickens. We highlighted that in the film room. Did a really nice job stepping up, bringing the thunder. And like Najee's also a guy who doesn't struggle in pass protection. So not really too worried about that if he can't go. But, obviously would like to have him out there. Alex Highsmith still on crutches, ankle. It sounds like he's probably going to be out like 2-3 weeks. They do get Nick Herbig back. So this is a huge week for him. Really just hoping that the soft tissue injuries kind of behind him, hamstrings, always tricky. But this is a really good matchup for Herbig, who's going to be going up against Ronnie Stanley, franchise left tackle for the Ravens. Stanley has actually had like a little bit of a resurgence this season. Hasn't been healthy in a couple years. He looks great this season. And then Herbig, like I'm just really excited to see like how he plays. Obviously, this is a huge game, divisional game. He's gonna get a chance to play a lot of snaps. I think him and Preston Smith are kind of gonna rotate in and out. Maybe they'll do some 3-edge stuff, kind of like they did last week with Smith on passing down situations and things like that. But I'm really excited for the opportunity for those two guys. It sucks not having Highsmith out there, but just the way that I anticipate the Ravens kind of playing, there's going to be a lot of one-on-one opportunities on that side. And with Herbig, like his ability to kind of win quick, if he can just have like one really quick win, maybe get a strip sack or something like that, that'd be huge. And then just like some of the other injuries, Corey Trice, he was a full participant in practice this week. He's still questionable. They haven't activated him off IR just yet. So we'll see like what his involvement, if any, is going to be. For the Ravens, they're relatively healthy. Arthur Millette, former Steeler, he's out this week. They rotate a bunch of guys like in the slot, like Kyle Hamilton can play in the slot. They got Ardarius Washington, kind of like a similar-ish player than Millette. Marlon Humphrey can play in the slot. Not really anything that like moves the needle in my opinion, but Travis Jones is really the big one. He's dealing with an ankle injury. He's limited all this week, all in practice. He's their nose tackle, really, really strong player. Coming out of UConn, I like Jones quite a bit. It seems like the Ravens always take they do a good job developing their own talent, but it seems like those guys sometimes on the defensive line and edge rushers kind of take until like year 3, year 4 to break out. And Jones has kind of broken out a little bit this year, like super strong at the point of attack, can stack and shed, get off blocks in the run game. So he's a good player. He is questionable. It seems like he's probably going to play. If I would to bet on it, I think he plays. So, but a lot to get into in this one. I think we got to really start with the kind of good on good matchup with the Steelers defense. against the Ravens offense. I mean, coming into the week, man, like you just look at pretty much any metric that you can find. The Ravens have been potent, dominant. I mean, you can use any phrase that you want to use. I mean, they're first in points per drive so far on the season. You look at EPA and success rate; they're first in both of those. Success rates over 50%. That's kind of like an elite mark. They run the ball efficiently. They've been passing the ball efficiently. I think the addition to bring Derrick Henry over here was an interesting fit just because of some of the ways that Henry likes to operate. But I think that they've done a good job of, finding a really cohesive mesh point between like him and Lamar Jackson and what the offense is supposed to look like. In the game, I kind of want to talk a little bit about the matchup that they played last year, just because like I went back and watched the film on that. I think the narrative out there is that, the Steelers have done a good job containing Lamar. And I think through the first couple games that Lamar saw the Steelers defense early in his career, I think that was absolutely true. I will say, like last year, though, I thought Lamar actually played like pretty well. It was really like the rest of the Ravens team kind of just self-destructing, if you will, around him. They had like 6 or 7 drops. And I mean, honestly, that's a pretty low number. Like that could honestly be more. Just a lot of costly drops. I thought the interception that he threw to Porter in the red zone was a really poor play from a placement standpoint. Left the ball inside on a fade route. You can't do that. But I thought Lamar did a pretty good job. I think the big thing is that the Steelers were able to keep themselves in the game, and Baltimore just kept shooting themselves in the foot. But I do want to focus on just like how they ended up playing Lamar in that game. One of the things that's really interesting and something they've done with him in years past is like they actually do blitz Lamar a lot. So this is going to be a really similar game plan to the way that they played Jay Daniels last week, in my opinion. You look at last year's matchup, they blitzed 23 times. That was a 51% usage rate. It was the number 1 rate in the NFL that week. They did some really good things in terms of like harassing him in the pocket and making him feel like really antsy, really uncomfortable, particularly as the game went on. I thought in the fourth quarter, you really saw the edge rushers kind of tee up a little bit. They also mixed in like a good amount of man coverage. In this game last year, it was pretty much like a 50-50 zone split. 50-50 man zone split. I think that's probably going to be a similar thing that you're going to see this week as well. I will say though, we did the film room on the Commanders Steelers game from last week. I thought the Steelers played pretty well overall. I thought it was a really impressive performance. They held the Commanders like 4.1 yards per play. And it was one of the best offenses coming into the league this year. I think there was one like overly concerning thing to me is like they did blitz a lot. So they blitzed 43% of Daniels dropbacks last week. They played man coverage on over 50% of the snaps. I think if you actually go back and watch the film in the all 22, you saw like the corners really struggling to hold up in man coverage. And I'm not really worried about Joey Porter Jr. in that aspect because I think that he'll be out there on the boundary, whoever they want to put out there. I don't know if he's going to follow Zay Flowers into the slot. I would say probably not. But whether it's Johnson out there or Bateman, I feel comfortable with like Porter in those man-to-man matchups on the boundary. The other thing about that is though, like who they're going to decide to play in the slot. Like as they've gotten Cam Sutton back, he seemed like he was getting a lot of the passing down work last week. To me, I highlighted it in the film room, like Sutton looked like he was really struggling to move. How much of that was rust? How much of that is just like father, like he is a little bit older now. He's getting towards 30. I don't really know. I think it's concerning though, just because of this match in particular, because some of the things that makes Lamar great, everybody knows about the dual threat capabilities, like his ability as a runner, all this other stuff, the electric playmaking outside the pocket, whatever. But like Lamar inside the pocket, the way that he throws the ball with touch in the intermediate area of the field is really the secret sauce to like what makes him a special player, in my opinion. You just look at like some of the numbers, just particularly like the way that they use Zay Flowers. They've kind of figured out that like they use him a lot in motion and they use him a lot in the slot. Like in terms of intermediate targets this year, he's got 18 receptions. It's the second most in the NFL, which tied, I think, are right behind like Justin Jefferson. So like that kind of shows you like the realm that they're operating within. Lamar, even like last week, I think he was 6 or 7, 81 yards, 3 touchdowns in the intermediate area of the field. So that's really where he likes to operate. That's why like the tight ends have always been a big point of involvement in this offense. I do think that the Steelers do have favorable matchups up front. I mentioned Ronnie Stanley playing a good ball. Tyler Linderbaum, the center, is a good player as well. But I think the right side of the offensive line is really kind of like a point, like a weak point for them. They've got Daniel Faalele playing at right guard, Roger Rosengarten, the right tackle. He's a rookie out of Washington. Somebody I liked a decent amount coming out. One thing about Rosengarten is like he really struggles with power. So that's not necessarily TJ's forte, if you will. But it wouldn't surprise me to see him like try to like get him with a couple power rushes, speed to power, bull rushes, things like that. And maybe if they put Preston Smith over there too, like that could be something they lean into a little bit. But I do think the Steelers have some advantages there. I do think that Justice Hill, their pass protecting back, has been better in pass protection this year, but they exposed him like really bad last year in that matchup. He was terrible, honestly, in that game. So just something to keep an eye on. I will say too, another thing with like just the marriage between Derrick Henry. Henry is still like 85% of like his peak, in my opinion. You watch him play, like he's hit 20 plus miles an hour on like, I think 3 or 4 plays already this season. He's hit home runs. The big thing about Henry is like, he was always in this wide zone system in Tennessee, operated a lot under center. Now he's playing more in the gun with like the way that the Ravens like to play. They use some heavy personnel. It's a lot of zone ready type plays. Of course, Lamar's impact as a runner there, he takes like a guy out of the box just by him being Lamar Jackson. So it's kind of giving him, even though the numbers between like light boxes and stuff doesn't seem super drastic, but Lamar being a runner has given him some additional room, in my opinion. Henry, like what makes him special is just like the footwork for a bigger dude. He's like 250 pounds, but like he can ride the wave and find cutback lanes. The Steelers have always like charged the mesh point at Lamar and like forced him to get the ball up. And like that's just a choice that you have to make. Like you don't want him like running amok everywhere and just like running around the field and creating explosive plays. But they just had to do a good job, staying in their gaps. Guys are going to have to get off blocks. They do a mix of like power stuff. They do some zone stuff. They run to the perimeter. They run well inside the tackles. Henry's like, I think 6th or 7th this year in like rushing success rate. So he's had a good year. He's leading the NFL in rushing yards, all this stuff. I mean, you can go on and on, but the big thing for me is just like making sure that you're stopping him at the line of scrimmage. Like you don't want this dude in the 2nd, 3rd level just because like the stiff arm stuff, his explosive play capabilities, you want to make him earn it. Like he's almost like a build-up type of speed runner too. Like he gains speed and power the further down the field that he gets. So if you can like start to hit him at the line of scrimmage, like before he really gets going, that's kind of the way to kind of slow him down a little bit. Another thing that I looked up about Henry, just like I'm watching the film, I just felt like he was, the old cliche of getting better as the game went on. First half of games, 4.9 yards per carry. It's pretty good. Second half of games, 7.0 yards per carry. Like rushing success rates up as well in the second half of games. So this is one where like the Steelers offense is going to have to do a good job, keeping up with the points. The Ravens have scored at least 20 points and had 375 offensive yards in every game this season. So the Ravens are probably going to move the ball. This is a really good offense, the best offense in the league statistically. They're going to move the ball. They're going to score some points. So the Steelers are going to have to go blow for blow with them to a certain extent. I think the big thing is just like trying to do what you can in terms of making Lamar uncomfortable in the pocket, making sure that I thought they did a really good job against Daniels last week in terms of maintaining like rush lane integrity. Lamar is a good navigator in like really tight spaces. He's a skinny dude. But he's also kind of hard to like get down in the pocket, but just making sure that he doesn't like extend plays. Cause like some of the most backbreaking plays that you'll see on film for this offense is the ones where he's holding the ball for like 10 seconds and it's just impossible to cover. Doesn't matter who you've got out there at receiver, who you've got out there at corner. You just can't hold the ball. You can't let him hold the ball for 12 seconds. So we'll see what that looks like. I'm optimistic about like the defensive performance, especially after how they played last week. I would say like my biggest concern though just continues to be like how this team is going to match up when they choose to play man coverage, in certain matchups like this against mobile quarterbacks, what that looks like. Try to make sure that you swipe the ball at Lamar in the pocket. He can sometimes be a little loose with the football. So that's something you can kind of get after too. I mentioned that before the game last year. But Lamar's playing at an extremely high level, probably the MVP front runner at this point. Now, as impressive as the Ravens offense has been on film and has been statistically, the Ravens defense has not been. It's a really like Jekyll and Hyde almost type of defense. They've been like the league's best run defense so far this year. You look at like success rate so far, and like they've been like dominant against the run. It's a really difficult team to run the ball against, but you can throw on them pretty much at will. Rushing success rate 30% this year. That's number 1 in the NFL. Second place is Minnesota at 32%. They just did a really good job. Like their defensive line between Matabike, already talked about Travis Jones, Broderick Washington. The other defensive end is like more of just like a run stopper that they use on early downs. But, their guys are playing really well at the point of attack. They got linebackers that flow to the football well. Like you just look at it, they've only allowed 10 runs this year to go over 10 yards. It's pretty impressive, man. Like, and I went back and watched those 10 runs, and it's like you can't even really get like a theme on like, okay, they really struggle with this concept. You can do this against them. Like the 10 runs are split out. Like there's a couple scrambles, There's like 2 end arounds to receivers. There's like a pitch play. There's one where like somebody just completely falls down at the first level and creates a huge cutback lane. So it's like there's not really anything you could take away with them. They are like I think that the Steelers could potentially lean into like some of their trap stuff. They did that a lot last week too. I think they ran like 3 or 4 plays of trap. But it's a difficult defense to run the ball against. Of course, the Steelers are going to maintain their like run heavy approach, which may force them into some 3rd and long situations if they can't, stay on schedule. The good part about that though is like the Ravens haven't been very good on 3rd down. They'll do some stuff creatively in terms of like what they'll do with their front, but they play a lot of split field coverages. They will like spin down into like cover 3, things like that. The way that you can really get after this team is 2 different ways, throwing the football. One, they just been terrible like this year in terms of like allowing explosive plays over the top. And like if you just go and look like how the Steelers offenses have been constructed with Russell Wilson at quarterback, it's been a lot of explosive plays over the top. They're throwing fades to George Pickens, pushing the ball down the field vertically, trying to stretch the defense in that way. And the Ravens defense has been extremely susceptible to that. You just look at like some of the numbers, man. Like the Ravens defense has allowed the most completions, 22, second most touchdowns, 6, and second most passing yards, 698 on throws of 20 plus air yards this season. It's been bad. Like sometimes there's not even guys in the screen. You got guys giving up on plays. The miscommunication is bad. The zone pass off rate is terrible. I don't even think that it's necessarily all a talent thing. Like I think Nate Wiggins has done some good things in coverage, but he struggled to find the ball consistently in the air. He's gotten beat by a double move against the Bengals that I remember on film. Brandon Stevens, I think, had a really solid season last year. He's like a press man, physical corner, but he hasn't played very well this year. And then Marlon Humphrey's like still a pretty solid player as well. I think he's actually had like a better year than he had last year. But the safeties haven't been good. Like Eddie Jackson has not been good in coverage. Marcus Williams, who I've always kind of thought was a really good player, he's just always struggled to stay healthy. He was better last year playing on one arm than he is this year. They've attacked him ruthlessly in coverage this year. He just has not been able to keep up. The ways that I anticipate the Steelers trying to attack them is like you'll probably see a lot of like post wheel. You could do some forward vert stuff. Like I said, their zone spacing isn't good. Like post sail, any of those 3-level concepts to the boundary is probably like where they're probably going to lean into the most. And you can also take advantage of this team, like in terms of just throwing the ball over the middle. So one of the things that I was kind of looking at for a different reason earlier this week, because I was actually talking about like Minka's impact on the defense and like some of the ways that he's like really helping the Steelers defense, even though he's not necessarily creating a ton of turnovers. But Sports Info Solutions, which is a database that I use for a lot of like stats and just type of look some different stuff up to find stuff. They have it characterized where it's like you can break passing directions down by like left middle, and right middle. You just look at like basically these are throws like that are in between the numbers. The Ravens this season have allowed the most completions, 163, the most passing yards, 1983, and the most touchdowns on throws in between the numbers this year. Like you could anything that you want really has been on the table. I think Roquan Smith has really been a good player for a long time. He doesn't look like the same player to me athletically. He looks like a little bit step slower. He hasn't been nearly as impactful in coverage this year. Trenton Simpson, the guy that they replaced Patrick Queen with, has had some moments. I think he's like a player worth investing in, but like he's not the same caliber of player as Patrick Queen. So we'll see what that looks like. Speaking of Patrick Queen, I'm really excited about seeing like the things that he can do. I think he's going to be really amped up for this game. We talked about that with him in the offseason. I can't wait. I hope he makes a huge play because I've got a lot of receipts saved in the bookmarks folder on the Twitter sphere. But this is a passing offense that I think is slated to kind of take advantage of some of the things that the Ravens do. In my opinion, to win this game, you're probably going to need to score about like 24, 27 points at bare minimum. Russ is going to have to hit 2 to 3 plays down the field of 20 plus air yards. They're going to have to find Pickens. They're going to hopefully get something maybe from Calvin Austin or Mike Williams as well. And then I think he's going to have to make a couple throws over the middle of the field, like on some end breakers and things like that. I know that that's not Russ's specialty. It's such an obvious weakness for this team as well. So like, even if those intermediate throws or throws over the middle are like crossers, for example, they tried some of that stuff earlier this season. That's one of the ways that like Russ will choose to activate the middle of the field. So look out for that. But overall, like I'm really excited about like just the matchup here. I think from a Baltimore perspective, like their pass rush has been a little bit better than I expected. Even out, their ace is Matabike. He's had a pretty solid season, maybe not as good As you'd anticipate, they are going to be. It does seem like Kyle Hamilton's probably going to play in this one, I think, or at least the last time I checked, he was. Hamilton's a really unique player because he can play deep safety. He can play in the slot. He's somebody that you almost like you have to be aware of like pre-snap because he's a really good blitzer. He flies downhill. But I think the Steelers are going to have to move the ball through the air. Like this is going to have to be a rest game because it's going to be really tough to run the football efficiently against this defense. I mean, I'm not saying that it can't happen. It's just like we don't really have a proof of concept this season in terms of like a direction that they could potentially lean or things that you can do because just nobody's been all that successful. But you have the teams have been successful throwing the ball, so it could be a huge George Pickens game. I said that like my bold prediction on the afternoon drive podcast on Steelers Now that he had a career or a season-long reception in this one. I think he scores like a 50-yard touchdown just because I see it happening. Baltimore will end up busting a coverage. He'll beat somebody deep. I know like he's going to be amped up to play in this one as well. So super exciting game. I could go on and on about this one, but I'm just really excited to see who comes out on top. I think this is kind of a statement win for the Steelers, or could be a statement win for the Steelers. They've won 7 of the last 8 against Baltimore. The big thing to keep in mind on too, like when these games get close, you don't want to rely a lot on field goals in this one, just because I do think that this is going to be like more high scoring than I think people are anticipating, or maybe Vegas is anticipating. But the Steelers do have like a special teams advantage in this one. Like Chris Boswell has been better than Justin Tucker this year, and I don't know that it's really been all that close, to be honest with you. And then too, like just Tomlin's teams over the past, however many years, like I just trust Tomlin's teams a little bit more in tighter games than I trust Harbaugh's. Like they've given up some like second half leads. I mean, they blew a game to Vegas earlier this season that they shouldn't have. But like this Ravens team is capable of collapsing at any moment. We saw it last year in the first matchup. Like receivers dropping passes everywhere. They just look like a totally different team than the team that they were putting on film coming into the week. So I do think that there's like a psychological thing too here, is if like the Steelers can get off to a little bit faster of a start, can kind of prove that they can play with them a little bit, like that could creep in a little bit too. So just, got to make somebody other than Lamar beat you. That's going to be difficult, but that's really the key point for me. And then on the opposite side of the ball, got to make sure that you hit on those explosive plays. It's a risky way of doing business on offense, but that's the way the Steelers have built their offense right now. Running the ball, try to find a little bit of success, at least to the point where you're at least getting like 3-4 yards of carry, and then hitting those explosive plays over the top. And they're going to have to hit a couple in order to stay in this game, in my opinion. So again, appreciate y'all support. Make sure that you drop your comments in the comment box. Make sure that you get entered into the giveaway, and then I will be back. See, they play at 1 o'clock, so depending on the outcome of the game, if they win, I would like to record that and get it up Sunday night. If they don't win, I'll probably record like Monday morning or maybe late Sunday night. We'll see. But I will be back after the game just to kind of drop my recap, just to give you my thoughts on that kind of stuff. As always, appreciate your support. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Go Steelers.